Hi, thank you very much. Thank you very much for attending our virtual reading. It is for December Tales, a collection of brand spanking new and classic ghost stories. The seed for this project came from this Smithsonian article that Colin Dickey wrote a few years back that talked about the way that ghost stories used to be an integral part of the December winter holidays. And happily enough, Colin agreed to write the forward to this book. So we're going to start off. We have a few different readers. We have Kate Maruyama, we have Nicole Sconiers, and we have Glen Hirshberg. And I'm going to read an old story. So we have 3 new stories and 1 very old story. So we'll start off with Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Maruyama, and I'm going to be reading from my story, The Two Alices. To set it up, Alice Diaz works at a restaurant called Gerald's, which is exactly modeled on Clifton's in LA, if you're familiar with it. All of the descriptions are real. And she meets this guy she thinks is kind of a hipster named Eli Nakamura, and they start to hit it off. Eli is in the restaurant looking for his girlfriend, whose name is also Alice. So, all right, they talked about food. Hilarious in this cafeteria modeled bastion of white cooking to talk about onigiri and tacos and Grand Central Market and the aguas frescas stands and bugetsudo and mochi. And Alice loved the way his eyes lit up when he talked about a flavor or when he recognized a place she mentioned. They talked about their families, the crazy mashup. His Japanese grandparents were more upset about his folks hooking up than his Jewish grandparents. His grandfather said he'd survived a pogrom, he could survive his daughters marrying a Japanese man. Eli trailed off at that point, looked sad and distant. There was something he wasn't talking about. She imagined it was other Alice. So, is Alice, your Alice, a girlfriend? Eli twirled his sad water with his straw. After a long moment, he looked up and said, once, but not now. We had a disagreement. It was a stupid fight, really. Her parents had a problem with me, and she's too swayed by everything they say. He looked up at her and blushed, perhaps having shared too much. I wanted her to know I'm going away. She has to know. She went from oddly hopeful to when he said once to disappointed when she saw how devoted he was to this other Alice. It's stupid. She has always been a romantic, but she knew she was feeling slightly more romantic about this guy because of his feelings for other Alice anyway. Nothing like a man forlorn and in love to get the heart pumping. Going away? He looked at his watch. I'll try again tomorrow, but I'm getting worried. Did you always meet her? Can you text her or something? I mean, give her a call? It became important to her now that Eli found his Alice, that Alice found her Eli. He stood up and put his hand on her wrist, squeezing. It was cold from the ice water. Thank you, Alice. You're a good person. That warmed her. She smiled and nodded, and he was off down the stairs with a skip. Even his jaunty walk was dreamy. The next night, her shift started at 4, and she was running late because her urban geology class ran over. She pulled open the front door of Gerald's, which had reached that slow post-lunch hour. The place stunned her every time. Its entrance opened up into a vast wood-paneled 2-story room with balconies on either side. A giant waterfall cascaded over faux boulders from the 2nd floor to the 1st, and a stuffed rearing grizzly bear overlooked the entire scene. The noise and heat from outside was replaced by the cool murmur of people eating, bouncing off the tiled floor, and the muffled walla from the bar upstairs. Alice was on the bar again tonight and hoped that busing shift she'd worked 2 days was her last. It looked like it, but you never knew until Gil posted a schedule. She passed the cafeteria, which served overpriced, tasty-ish white people food. She jogged up the wooden stairs to the 2nd floor. The brightness of the sunlight from the ballroom at the front of the building near blinded her as she took the stairs. The room's tall white windows bounced sunlight off a white-walled room that featured a decrepit bandstand from somewhere in the 1940s and a stuffed mountain lion frozen mid-pounce. There were 2 women by the window talking to each other. The room was supposed to be closed, so she stopped to talk to them. Gil always went ballistic when people were where they weren't supposed to be. Excuse me, ma'am. She didn't know how to address them plural, but she figured at least one of them would turn. Neither of them did. They murmured on, as if she wasn't there. That pissed her off. People always thought they owned the place, like it wasn't a business with boundaries. She stepped over the velvet cord drawn across the door and walked toward them. About 20 feet from them, she said, "Excuse me." The women looked up startled, but then in a blink, they weren't there. One moment, they were completely outlined by the streaming sunlight, and then poof, they were gone. New ghosts for the list. Gerald's had its share of ghosts, but when you encountered them, there was usually an earmark or two, a sudden odor of sulfur, or a patch of cold. The one time Alice had run into Shirley, there was an electric zap, the smell of burning, and the air around her got very cold. Nothing with these two, but then again, they were across the room. Gerald's had Harry, who haunted the service stairs. He usually grumbled, but if the volume grew on him, you'd want to move quickly. He tended to jump out at you. Shirley moaned by the payphones in the basement, and Maxine haunted the alley when they put out the trash at night. Elmer sobbed quietly in the upstairs gallery. Ghosts were part of the ebb and flow of the place with its near 100 years of history. In the 70s, it had become a druggy haven, which resulted in a great deal of drama, a few overdoses, and the types of souls who stuck around and had beef. Alice wanted to add these two ladies to the list in the manager's office. She wondered if she named them like Laverne and Shirley, although Shirley was already taken, or come up with a catchy term for them, like conferring dames. She just hoped Max hadn't seen them yet. There were extra points for new ghosts, and sometimes on a Friday, management would buy you a drink if it was a good find. She'd been here a full year, and she hadn't gotten to name one yet. She stepped back over the cord and walked past the two stuffed peacocks stationed in the stairwell, curved and lifelike. The bar was extra dark after squinting into the bright sunlight of the other room, and she had to stop a minute until her eyes adjusted. The fire, of course, was burning brightly, pretty hilarious as it was 80 outside, but it did make for that immersive experience. It was crazy busy that night, a Saturday. She didn't even see Eli until she heard him calling, "Alice, hey, Alice." She wheeled around and he grinned at her in a way that made her jealous of other Alice again. She was still happy to see him. "Hey, you find her? It's packed in here tonight, might be tough." He shook his head. It was senseless to try talking in all of this. He hollered, "I leave Monday." He held up his hand and got out a fountain pen. Usually people who have fountain pens have fetishes about them and fancy ass black ones, but this was a workaday big light pen. Frickin' hipsters. He wrote on a napkin, "Meet me, please, one last time, Monday, 10 a.m., 1st Street, Eli." She hollered at him, "First Street where?" "Central, across from Japanese Village." By the Janum, the Japanese American National Museum was too long to yell. "What?" "Ugh, too noisy." "Near Fugetsudo?" His eyes lit up. "Yeah, exactly, near Fugetsudo, but at the corner." She felt a sudden surge of hope. Does he want to meet me? Does she want me to meet him? He said, "Can you tell Alice if you see her? She should be here asking for me." She nodded and smiled demonstratively, tucking the napkin in at her pocket. She was preoccupied, worried, looking a million places, for other Alice, of course. She held her finger up to him. 1 minute. She got his sorry ass a Tillamook do. Rocks. "Put it on my tab," she told Max. She wouldn't have to pay him till next paycheck. When she brought it to him, he anxiously reached for his wallet. "On the house," she said. "Thank you." Mercifully, the loud party by the tree gathered their things and left, and the bar quieted from a din to a clamor. She could just about hear him when he said, "I leave Monday. I don't know when I'll be back." "Where are you going?" He gave her a long look as if he were thinking about what to say. He shook his head. "To camp." It was one of those moments where it feels like someone's handing you something really heavy, or you're just not sure what it is. Camp, like an army thing, or a family thing, or a commune thing. But there didn't seem to be space to ask, so she just reacted to this heaviness. Alice said, "Okay, I'm sorry." He shrugged, took a drink, and closed his eyes as he did so. "That is so good, thank you." He thought for a moment. "I'm most grateful to you. I hope she comes, but I'm glad I met you. Please let people know, will you, about what's going on?" "What's going on?" He looked anxiously around, finished his drink, and got to his feet, pulling his hat on. "All my life, I wasn't Japanese enough, but now it seems like I'm Japanese enough." He laughed, incredulous, with a single, "Huh." He shrugged again, holding out his hand. "Alice Diaz, it was very nice meeting you." He took her hand in both of his and shook it firmly, bowing. He did not let go. She said, "She's a lucky Alice," and trailed off. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Really.
I love that story. I love all these stories, but a few of them I love a lot, and this is one of them. So let's see. So next, Glen Hirshberg.
Hi, I'm Glenn. Thanks to Jack for putting a terrific anthology together, and it's really good to be here with Nicole and Kate and all of you. Thank you for coming virtually. I'm going to be reading from my story from this book, which is brand new and called Jetty Sarah. And all you really need to know to set this up, we're in a decaying Northern California fishing town in a storm, and the denizens of the town are gathered in the local breakfast place slash diner on a rainy morning. We're all at the window. The rain's crashing down so fat and hard we don't see her at first, except for Nell Tom, obviously. He's already seen her. It's also pre-dawn dark at 11 in the morning, so mostly what we see is our own faces. Cluster of fishermen and ex-fishermen and fishermen's widows and widowers floating there in the glass as though underwater. That's not a thought any of us likes, not around here. And then Fresnel Tom points, and old Ellis, who isn't older than the rest of us, just looks at, sighs. Shit, yep. She's so thin, even with that flappy black rain shell whipping around her, she looks like some sort of torn loose sapling tumbling on the gusts, except she's tumbling into them. Her hair is still the same color as that jacket, oil slick black, only without any swirls of color where light catches. Her skin, what we can see of it between spits of rain, flying hair, isn't exactly pallid, isn't any color really, the color of sidewalk, a surface you walk on. Pobre chica, Lulabelle murmurs. Pathetic bitch, says Lee. Even though it's his fault, she's out there. He's the one who told her the story. No one swats him. No one argues. 12 years since the sea did this whole town a solid, sucked her John and his whole monstrous crew off our streets and out of our lives. But everyone here still has memories. Probably everyone has some they haven't even shared. Well, come on, says Brother Jay, flipping up his hood. You come on, says old Ellis. Again, for form's sake, he's already zipping in. We all are. We wait a few seconds longer until she's well past, halfway down the hill to the beach. Not that she'll see us or care if she does. Pobre chica on a mission, that's our Sarah. Lee's coat is still dripping so hard it's like he's got a personal rainstorm right on top of him. It makes Fresnel, Tom, and Lulabelle laugh. Hilarious, says Lee. He pulls the door open and we're out in it. The downpour has actually slackened some, but the wind's up, and it shoves against us as we trail along toward the water. Reminds us of those days, that one horrible year when they were among us, John and his crew. The shoves when they passed us constant, casual, like we were doors to throw open, cats to kick, not people at all. Sources at best of supplies they might need, of sons they could hook on whatever cut product they'd scored and couldn't offload in Eureka or Medford. Yo ho, one of us, probably old Ellis, murmurs, and the shudder whips through our whole group. If it's a pirate's life for you, you better be goddamn sure you're a pirate. Look at her, says Lee. He sounds regretful, apologetic, which is ridiculous. No one blames him. He was trying to help, same as we all have at one point or other. Straight for the goddamn jetty. That's where she's headed, all right. Across the beach, feet catching in strands of washed up kelp and trailing them behind her, which makes her look like some skeletal black fish wriggling free of a net. Her hair whips and flaps. Move it, says Lulabelle, but we're already picking up the pace. From the top of the hill at the edge of town, all you can see is harbor, but even that's shuddering today. The boats tilting and turning on their tie ropes, banging against the bursts of the dock like bells being rung. Of course, you can barely hear them over the ocean. Halfway down the hill, we see the sea, and then we move even faster. Come back, Sarah, Lee bellows abruptly, his voice boomeranging right around in his face. There's no way she could hear him, not over all that roaring and smacking and splashing. Even if she could, there's no way she would listen. By the time we've hit the beach, she's up on the jetty, head down, marching straight through that gauntlet of state-generated warning, tsunami zone signs. Then the homemade ones we put up, partly for tourists, mostly for her. The one with the stick figures tumbling into the heaving abyss over the words, tsunamis, seriously. The one we had painted right onto metal of the wreckage of this harbor in January of '64. Surprisingly, just as we reach the edge of the water and take up post in the lee of our ridiculous Swope City light, Sarah half turns our way. We get a good look at her sidewalk skin face. With a jolt that hits us all together, a wave crashing in, we remember what she looked like then, right before John and his crew came. While they were there too, if we're honest, just as thin, but majestic somehow, grown into herself, lean and wild. She's gone all beaky now, like some wounded seabird abandoned by the flock, skimming the beach to scavenge leavings. She isn't looking forward or responding to us, needless to say. She's seen something in the water, thinks she has, stops a second, starts to crouch. Old Ellis shivers, then we're all doing it. We watch, shivering, until she straightens. For one magical second, she looks like she's coming back this way. Then she glances up into the rain, raises both arms, and flips us the birds. Spinning away, she launches again down that spit of rock and pavement, our imaginary divide between Swope City and open ocean that we still catch ourselves imagining keeps us safe, time after time, in spite of everything. Spray flies up around her with every step as though she's causing it, like a little girl puddle jumping. Pretty soon, from where we stand, it's hard to see Jetty at all. She looks like she's walking on water, hiking straight out to sea. We're not close enough now, and we know it. If the worst comes, wave, sure, but more likely her deciding just to go ahead and jump, fling herself into the arms of the man she seems utterly sure is waiting for her just below the surface. We'll never reach her in time. We should go out there with her. At least a few of us are pretty clearly going to have to today. At least the rain has thinned. Even the wind is sputtering, spitting gusts, but no longer hurling itself in our faces. The ocean's still slamming around out there, but it's gone a lighter gray. It looks more like it does when it lets people near or on it, frisky-like. I'll go, says Brother Jay. Me too, says Lee, but neither of them move yet. Sarah has stayed standing instead of kneeling out there on the jetty, and she's not moving much. Again, there's something bird-like about her, like a hovering gull holding its place in the currents of air. Oh, God damn it, says Fresnel Tom, but not about Sarah, and he steps off the sand to the side of the jetty and splashes through the shore water toward the lighthouse. We call it a lighthouse. I guess it is. It's still hard to believe it ever really worked. It's tall enough, I suppose, a good 20 feet high, and it has withstood more than its share of weather. But the land it is slowly sinking into was never a raised point, is blocked from sight of most open water by the curve of the coast, and isn't even accessible when the tide's up and the water completely covers the narrow sandy spit connecting it to the beach. Tom's been working on it for years, scraping decades-deep coatings of bird shit off the sides and getting new glass made for the windows and seeing to the machinery. Even so, it looks mostly like a model lighthouse that washed up here from somewhere. Cracked concrete, a rusted metal door that Tom keeps boring new bolts into and which the ocean keeps pushing open and rushing through, leaning tower of lighthouse. Reaching the door, Tom stares down at the water gushing over his feet and inside, laying on yet another layer of damp upon damp. He bangs the door with his fist and it rings. Oh, hun, says Lulubelle. Not about Tom, we know, and we all swing together again toward the jetty. Sarah's still not kneeling, not yet, but she's all leaned over, staring down as the splash hurls itself up the stones over her boots. She has her hands out straight and her mouth has started moving. If you didn't know better, had never stood near enough when she gets like this, you could mistake what she's doing for conjuring. What she's really up to is worse, of course, breaks your heart every time. She's cooing. Brother Joy makes a clucking noise, part sympathy, part disbelief. It's like she really believes it, you know? It's not like that at all, murmurs Lee. Then he says it again louder because it's hard to make him out over the whapping water and he wants us to hear his regret. She does. Right on cue, down she drops. Her hands, at least for now, are back in the pockets of her windbreaker, but they won't stay there. She's not leaning yet anyway, and she is. There's no way we can see her face, too much spray flying around, like the world's being painted into being or chipped out of being right in front of us. But every single one of us knows she's smiling. It's our oldest city tale, the one we've all not just heard but told, practically our motto. In high summer on the right night, with the Brother J diner humming and the midnight crab scrambles flying, some caught up tourist or other will ask the right question of the right person, and just like that, we'll be reciting faces in the waves. The way in storms, the water sometimes gives you glimpses of people it has taken from you. Their visages so solid, so precisely as you best remember them, that you expect them to open their watery mouths and gurgle hello. This is what passes when you live by the grace of the ocean for mercy. On the jetty, amid the rioting spray, our Sarah stretches out her hands. It's not raining anymore, for whatever difference that makes. There's so much wet flying around in the air, it's a wonder we can breathe it. Another old Swope City tale. Half gilled we are. Like she's begging him to take her, Lulubelle murmurs, something very near a catch in her voice, or else simple wind-borne wetness. We're watching hard now. When she leans forward even a little more, which she will, any second, we're going to have to move, make sure we're closer. If it were really him, says old Ellis, he fucking would, not for love, for sheer meanness. If it were him, says Brother Jay, he wouldn't stop at her. For no reason we can see, Sarah glances back in our direction, stares hard, seems to anyway. We all feel it. Maybe she's telling him to go ahead. It takes longer than usual today. She's got her hands out and we're pretty sure her mouth's still moving, but she's just crouched there and the spray riots around her for so long that she almost melts into the landscape. Jetty, leaning lighthouse, ship masts in the harbor, cloud masts, darker cloud masts, and our Sarah, beacon, buoy, something on which to focus so you can watch the world roll. Every single one of us, Tom too, from up in his beloved light, is watching, looking right at her, mesmerized in the way looking at that ocean does that to you, a miraculous cleansing sensation on the right day, transcendental, a reason to stay. And yet somehow not a single one of us sees. How is that possible? We see her, okay, don't process, but we all see her reared back, not leaning forward, arms straight out in front, palms forward, not defensive, but not reaching either. Words fly from her mouth like whitewater, hang in the air. It should be terrifying, the fact that we can hear her. We've had it wrong, we all think together, as one thought, one thing thinking, not a bunch of town nobodies living our separate, grieving, peaceful nobody lives. Then Lee says, oh. Even then it takes us a second we do not have to understand, to make sense of the fact that we aren't collectively imagining what our Sarah is saying, but really hearing it. Because the wind hasn't just dwindled, it has dropped off the face of the world. The sea hasn't just ceased slapping and slamming, but vanished, literally is not there. The boats in the harbor clunk as they drop down on rocks and sand that moments ago were bottom. The jetty looms suddenly, towering, like the top of a just risen island, brand new and streaming. There's a moment of blissful silence like no one in Swope City has experienced ever during 1 second of our lives on this earth. Finally, one of us screams, run. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Your story has one of my favorite images in there where Sarah's out on the jetty and she's cooing. And there's something so heartbreaking and strange and creepy at the same time about that. I just love that image.
Thank you very much.
So next, when I started looking at stories for the anthology, I wanted to mix half old, half new. And I couldn't find many stories that hadn't already been widely anthologized. So I started going a bit deeper and I started looking in some old French stories, and I came up with a story from a writing team named Ekman Chatrian. And they were at one time as big as Stephen King and Robert Michener and like all the big writers you kind of jammed together because they wrote everything. They worked together for decades, and they were intensely famous and well loved around the world, but fame is fleeting, I guess, but hopefully this will help get them back on the chart a little bit. This is a story called The White and the Black, and it was published originally in 1847. And editor's note, the story has been included in December Tells in honor of my ancestor, Hans Brubacher, another old Anabaptist. And yes, I had to look that up too, but he was. Okay, so in those days, we spent our evenings at Brower's Cafe, which opened out on Vieux Brissac Place. Each night, just after 8, we would arrive, one after the other, Frederick Schultz, the notary, Franz Marden, the mayor, Christopher Ulmit, the justice of the peace, the lawyer, Clares, Rotan, the engineer, and the young organist, Theodor Blitz, as well as several other dignitaries. Everyone sitting together like brothers at the same table, enjoying the strong, dark, frothy beer known as Bockbier. The arrival in our community of Theodor Blitz, who came to us from the university town of Jena with a letter of recommendation from Hormosius. With his dark eyes and disheveled hair, his thin pale nose, his sharp words, and his mystical ideas created a bit of discord among us. It was unsettling to see him jump up and make 3 or 4 tours of the room, flapping around in a strange manner and ridiculing the Swiss landscapes, represented on the walls with indigo blue lakes, apple green mountains, and red paths. He'd drop back in his seat, drain his mug in a single gulp, and kick off a discussion on some esoteric subject, be it the sacred music of the composer Palestrina, the Hebrew lute, the introduction of the organ in our basilicas, the Pentateuch, the 7 sabbatical millennia wherein the world is created, broken, and made anew, or whatever weighty yet fleeting topic that sprung to his mind. Then he'd knit his brow, plant his pointy elbows on the table, and lose himself in deep thought. Yes, his capriciousness disconcerted us somewhat, we other serious people, habituated to methodical thinking, but one grew used to it. Even Rotan the engineer, despite his mocking humor, ended up letting it go, and stopped, contradicting everything the young chapel master said, at least when he was right. As it so happened, Theodor Blitz was one of those sensitive types who are overcome by every variation in temperature. That year was extremely hot, and going into the autumn, we had several massive storms that made us fear for the grape harvest. One night, the entire gang found itself together as usual around the table, apart from Olmert, the old judge, and Blitz, our eccentric chapel master. The mayor was going on about the hail, then about great hydraulic works. Me, I was listening to the wind thrashing about in the tall plane trees in Schlossgarten Park, and to the jets of water pelting the windows. From time to time, you can make out the sound of a loose tile clanking along a rooftop, a door slamming shut, or a shutter beating against a wall. Then began the immense clamor of the tempest that howled, whistled, and moaned in the distance, as if unseen entities were searching each other out, calling to each other in the shadows, while those still among the living hid, curling up in a corner to escape their catastrophic encounter. The bells of St. Etienne were sounding 9 o'clock when Blitz stormed in, shaking his hat like a man possessed and crying out in his sibilant voice, "The devil is really up to his tricks now. The white and the black are jumbled together. The 9,990 demons of envy are battling and ripping each other to shreds. Go, Ahriman, spirit of evil, walk, ravage, devastate. The exalted Amshapans are in retreat, and Hura Mazda veils his face. What times, what times." While saying this, he ran around the room, stretching out his long, spindly legs and laughing in fits and starts. We were all stupefied by such an entrance, and for some moments, no one spoke a word. Finally, the engineer Rotan, moved by his caustic sense of humor, cried out, "What a load of hogwash you're chanting to us about there. What is an Amshapan, and why are you ranting about 9,990 demons of envy? You are too funny. Where in the hell do you come up with this strange talk of yours anyway?" Theodor Blitz stopped short, closing one eye, but keeping the other wide open, gleaming with devilish irony. And when Rotan finished, he responded, "O great engineer, O sublime spirit, master of trowel and mortar, organizer of rubble, director of the right angle, the acute and the obtuse, you are correct, 100% correct." He bowed with a mocking air. "Nothing exists except matter, the level, the ruler, and the compass. The revelations of Zoroaster, of Moses, of Pythagoras, of Odin, of the Christ, harmony, melody, art, feeling, these are unworthy dreams for a luminous spirit such as yourself. The truth, the eternal truth, belongs to you alone. I bow before you, I salute you, I prostrate myself before your glory, as eternal as that of Nineveh and of Babylon." Having said these words, he spun twice on his heels and exited with a burst of laughter so piercing he sounded like a rooster greeting the dawn. Rotan started to grow angry, but in that same instant, old George Olmert entered, his head jammed deep into his oversized otterskin hat, his shoulders covered by a bottle green mantle with fox trim, its sleeves hanging down. His back was rounded, his eyelids half closed. His fleshy cheeks and large nose were dripping rain. Outside, the water fell in torrents. The drain pipes spewed, and the drainage ditches swelled into rivers. "Oh, good Lord," the good man said, "I must be out of my mind to go out in such weather, especially after the busy day I've had. 2 investigations, 2 official reports, interrogations. But for bulk beer and old friends, I'd swim across the Rhine." All while grumbling jumbled words, he removed his hat and opened his large mantle to retrieve his long Ulmer pipe, his pouch of tobacco, and his lighter that he placed with care on the table. After that, he hung his mantle and hat from the casement window stay, crying out, "Bravo! What can I do for you, Judge?" "You should close these shutters tight. Believe me, the storm could turn worse." The barkeep went out and closed the shutters. The old judge sat down in his corner and exhaled a sigh. "You're aware of what happened, Mayor," he said in a forlorn tone. "No, my old friend, tell me about it." Before responding, Mr. Olmert circled the bar with an attentive look. "We're alone, my friends," he said. "I can confide this to you. The body of poor Gretel Dick was just found around 3 o'clock this afternoon, discovered at the mill in Holderlock, lying beneath the sluice." "Beneath the sluice," his listeners cried out in unison. "Yes, with a rope around her neck." To better understand how hard these words hit us, it's necessary to know Gretel Dick was one of the loveliest girls in Vieux-Brissac, a tall brunette with blue eyes and rosy cheeks. She was the only daughter of the old Anabaptist, Petrus Dick, who held the rights to a significant portion of Schlossgarten's acreage. For a while now, the young woman, she who used to be so cheerful from her work at the wash house in the morning to the evening at the fountain surrounded by her friends, appeared so sad and serious. They'd all seen her crying and attributed her upset to the incessant harassment of Zephyr Mutz, the postmaster's son, a strapping but humorless and high-strung young man with an aquiline nose and curly black hair. He followed her like shadow and never let go of her arm at the Sunday dance. There had even been talk of marriage, but the union was opposed by the entire family, both parents as well as Zachary's sister, Sophiel, and her husband, Karl Bremer, under the pretext they couldn't welcome a pagan into the family. Gretel had been missing for 3 days, and no one knew what had become of her. Now, having learned of her death, 1,000 different thoughts ran through our minds. No one gave another consideration to the discussion between Theodor Blitz and Rotan the engineer regarding unseen spirits. Every eye questioned Judge Olmec, who, his large bald head bent and his thick white brows knitted, puffed away gravely on his pipe, his mind elsewhere. And Zachary Mutz, the mayor said, what happened to him? The old man's cheeks flushed, and after a few seconds of reflection, he responded, Zachary Mutz has taken off. Taken off, Claire's exclaimed, so he's admitting guilt. That's how I read it, the old judge said, his tone turned unexpectedly cordial. A man doesn't run away for no good reason. For the rest, we visited his father's place and found the entire house in turmoil. Those people have lost their wits. His mother goes around stammering and pulling out her hair. The daughter has donned her Sunday best and dances around the place like a fool. You can't get anything out of any of them. As far as Gretel's father is concerned, the poor man is in inexpressible despair. He doesn't want to compromise his daughter's honor, but he's sure Gretel Dick left the farm of her own accord last Tuesday to follow Zachary. All the neighbors confirm this. The police are finally out searching the countryside. We shall see what comes of it. There was a long silence. Outside, the rain fell in sheets. It's horrible, the mayor cried out suddenly, horrible. And to think that all fathers, all who raise their children to fear God, are vulnerable to such heartbreak. Yes, Judge Olmec responded, relighting his pipe. That's how it is. You could easily say that what happens is God's will. But in my opinion, the spirit of shadow gets involved in our lives much more than he needs to. For each man, how many miscreants with neither faith nor in God nor respect for the law are out there? I ask you, my friends, if the devil wanted to count his troops. He didn't have time to finish because in the same second, the triple flash of lightning lit up the slits between the shutters and dampened the lamplight. Almost as quickly, followed by the crack of thunder, sharp and splintered enough to make a person's hair stand on end, it sounded like the world itself had exploded. Just then, St. Etienne Church sounded the half hour, the slow vibrations of its bronze bells sounding as if they came from no more than 4 feet away. But from far, very far, a drawling, plaintive voice came to us pleading, help me, help me. I like this story partially because of its overly religious sort of tone, but also because you don't know where it's coming and it takes this huge sort of turn halfway through. So I'm very happy to include it. But speaking of stories, I'm happy to include Nicole. This story, her story is one of the stories I know is going to outlive this book that we're bringing out. And it's going to, I'm just very proud. I'm happy to be able to say you saw it here first. So Nicole.
Thank you, Jack, for including me. I'm very excited about this anthology, and I'm excited about being included with Glen and Kate. Those are wonderful stories. So this story is a little different. It's about 4 teens in the 80s who encounter an otherworldly visitor in their quest to get high in the project. Winter of 1986 was a season of ice and blood in the project. Most folks believe the summer months bring out violence, but that December, the snow was dappled with road sludge and gore. In Booker Plaza, the 16-story public housing building adjacent to my cousin's house, a man was arguing with his girlfriend on their patio when he suddenly shoved her over the ledge. Her body slammed into the courtyard 6 stories below, where kids played basketball on hoops with no net. A teen from the neighborhood, high on crack, ran around with a Ginsu knife, slashing at the local kids and ultimately lopping off his own finger. Drug dealers demonstrated what poor marksmen they were by gunning down everyone except their intended target, including a 4-year-old girl. Violence is as fabled in the hood as order is in the suburbs. But that winter, crime took on a supernatural sheen, like an ornament on a Christmas tree of the damned. My cousin Ruth's house was a safe haven in a war zone. The tiny row home always sparkled, but on Christmas, it glimmered with strands of white and silver lights. One living room wall was covered in mirrored tiles, giving the impression that the room was much bigger than it was. It felt opulent and deceptive at the same time. People think if you live in the hood, you're dirty or a poor housekeeper, but Ruth was neither. She walked around with the damp rag, wiping down woodwork, polishing tiles. Although she didn't have much space, our family usually gathered there for Christmas parties the weekend before the holiday. I loved hanging out with Ruth's daughter, Joy. She was a Catholic school girl with a grimy streak. At 15, Joy was already talking to dudes twice her age. With her, I smoked weed for the first time, skipped school, stole Ruth's car, and went on a jaunt around Philly. At the Christmas party, when the laughter died down and the adults were too sleepy and drunk to notice, we would sneak out to meet with Joy's boyfriend Lance and his buddy Raphael and get high in Booker Plaza. Christmas dinner was a lively affair. The aroma of yams spiced with cinnamon and nutmeg and collard greens greasy with ham hocks wafted through the narrow kitchen. There was no dining room, so family members congregated around a small table near the fridge or huddled on the staircase, balancing a plate on their lap. Soul food made one nostalgic. My relatives' remembrances were like flickering home movies playing on the wall. You ain't lived till you rented an RV and drove down to Milledgeville, Cousin Milton said, shoveling a forkful of greens into his mouth. Man, I remember that trip, Uncle Scooter chimed in. He was a heavy-set man who always wore suspenders. They couldn't find the switch to turn on the air conditioner. We sweated like pigs for 13 hours. They laughed at their ignorance, at the colored cabin signs they passed, at the sundown towns in their rearview mirrors, at the relief they felt making it back to the benign north in one piece. I wouldn't be caught dead in the sticks down south. My cousin Andre spoke up. He was a sullen 23-year-old with a daughter, Danae, who was 6. A petty drug dealer, Andre haunted the alleyways and street corners of Ruth's Germantown neighborhood. We usually bought dime bags from him, but he was too cheap to give us the discount. South ain't that bad, ain't as violent as Philly, Uncle Scooter said. It's boring as hell. That's why I skipped the reunions, Andre shot back. Ruth cleared away dishes, wiping down the counter with a wet rag. A brown-skinned woman with deep dimples, she turned to look at her nephew through black spectacles. The Johnsons and Kellys are scattered around the country, but we don't visit as often as we should, she said. But family is important. After dinner, everyone retired to the second floor. There were 3 bedrooms upstairs, one of which had been converted into a lounge with a bar. This was the room where the grown-ups played pinochle, drank eggnog, and corn liquor, listened to Marvin Gaye and Earth, Wind, and Fire on the stereo, and told tall tales until they dozed off. The kids occupied themselves in Joy's bedroom across the hall. Andre wandered back and forth between the 2 rooms, a weary traveler with no country of his own. He was too young to mingle with our aunts and uncles and too old to hang out with us. By 10, Joy and I put on our leather trench coats. It was time to head out. At that moment, Andre returned from the other side. He stood in the doorway blocking our path. Where you going, cuz? Out, Joy said, trying to push him aside. Andre wore white shell-top Adidas with green stripes and no laces, and he stepped back so Joy didn't muss his pricey kicks. Andre exasperated Joy because he always asked her to watch his daughter, leaving Danae alone for hours while he ran the streets. Them knuckleheads gonna get you in trouble, Andre said. Worry about yourself, Joy said. Andre's beeper went off. In dramatic fashion, he swept his black bomber jacket to the side to check the device clipped to his waistband and see who was paging him. Beepers made drug dealers feel important, like they were carrying out some important work and not roaming the streets for their next drop. Since Andre was preoccupied with his call, Joy brushed past him, stepping on his sneaker. He cursed at her. I followed my cousin out the door. Snores and subdued laughter trickled out from the half-open door across the hall. Joy lived on a block so narrow, residents had to park on the sidewalk. We navigated the slippery street arm in arm, on our way to the Chinese restaurant around the corner to meet up with Lance and Raphael. The Booker housing project towered in the distance. It twinkled with multicolored lights like a concrete Christmas tree. The boys were smoking cigarettes and stomping their feet against the cold when we walked up. Lance was a wannabe player. I thought Joy was too good for him. Raphael flicked away his cigarette butt. He was a mixed kid with straight black hair that curled into a mullet. He made me swoon. We walked toward Booker Plaza, booming rap music from the tenement leading the way. We knew the streets were violent, but at 15, we thought we were immune to bullets and knives. We knew a woman got thrown 6 stories from a patio of the very building we had chosen to get high, but She was just an unfortunate victim of domestic violence. We knew gunplay often lit up the night like metallic fireflies, but we didn't think death could touch us. We were wrong. The high rise seemed to tremble as we approached, like a palsied king observing his ruined empire. Several boys were congregating around the entrance, freestyling lyrics. The Booker didn't have any type of door locks or security codes. You just walked in. As soon as Raphael reached for the door to open it, gunfire punctured the night. Everyone, even the rapping boys, scrambled inside the building. Once we were safe on the second floor landing, we collapsed in relieved laughter. We were so clever, thwarting death. The corridors were covered in graffiti and smelled of urine and sweat. There were kids' toys on the stairs. I stood on the landing looking out a dirty window at the street below. I could see Joy's house, the light she left on in her bedroom. My cousin pulled an unevenly rolled joint from her pocket. I didn't want to smoke out in the open. Even though lawlessness reigned in the Booker, it felt wrong to blaze up outside someone's door with some young girl's broken Barbie doll on the steps. Raphael sensed my hesitation. He guided me off the landing and down a dark corridor. Joy and Lance followed. Hallway lights flickered. The red and white exit sign was scribbled with graffiti. Raphael opened the door to a stairwell and we slipped inside. Moonlight streamed feebly through a cracked window, illuminating the lopsided steps and pocked walls the color of mud. The staircase was cold. Joy and I huddled on the top step in our trench coats. She pulled out the reefer again, the pungent bounty from Andre. The boys sat one step below us. Lance handed Joy a red lighter. She flicked the spark wheel and inhaled. Soon white wisps filled the vestibule like acrid ghosts. It's funny how weed affected us differently. I became giddy. Sometimes I had visions. Joy was a quiet girl to begin with, but she grew nearly comatose when she smoked. Lance laughed at nothing at all. Raphael leaned forward with his silken mullet, looking like the thinker, if Rodin's sculpture had ever soaked up the spirit of the street. I read somewhere that the thinker was observing the circles of hell, a tormented poet, a damned soul. The door creaked open, startling us. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I am so proud of all these stories, but I think that what I'm proud of the collection in general, I'll hold it up one more time for marketing purposes. You see all the great names here, because I think it combines exactly what you expect. I even have an M.R. James story in here because I love M.R. James and I'm a weak man. And then stories like Kate's and Nicole's and Glen's, which are ghost stories. They are winter stories, but they're not what you would necessarily expect in a kind of holiday themed or even just a December kind of ghost story book. So December Tales, it comes out September 28th. Yes, it comes out September, not December. I'm trying to get out for the early for the season. And if you enjoyed the Erkin Chateaubriand story, there I've got sort of a companion book. So I was looking for, so I looked for stories. I found stories I liked, but that didn't seem to fit in this. So 2 weeks after that, on October 12th, you'll see there's a book coming out called The Little Book of Horrors, which is a translation of 8 French stories that you may not know. I don't think they're commonly known in like among English speakers. Well, one is, but the rest I think are kind of will hopefully be new to you. So anyway, I'd like to thank you all again for joining us for this reading. Thank our readers, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jack, for everything.